Well, welcome to Transformative Question Workshop for Executives. Um, Glad to be here with you today. I'm Hannah Finrow. I know all of you, but I'm glad to be here with you and allow you to get to know each other and connect. And just know this is also your chance to ask some questions. And likely you came with a question. So, what question brought you here today? And so you can either take yourself off mute and share, or you can share in the chat. What question brought you here today?
Um, the question that brought me here today was, how can I get in my executive workshops? Because I haven't done one yet. Honestly. I'm just being honest.
Cool. Thanks, John. Allison says, working on asking awesome questions. You're in the right place. Yeah. Questions for executives.
Yeah, same. Because now that I last night finished my 1.0, I'm finally doing that executive portion. So I figured this would be a good kickoff for that.
Thanks, Sue.
I think for me, I think I ask good questions, that it's not very, can be so random. So I guess I'm just always looking to get better at asking, powerful questions.
Thanks, Shannon. Welcome, Jetty. We are just checking in with what question brought you here today. Just give you a chance to think about that. Thanks, Sue. Learning from others. Who else wants to share? What question brought you here today?
I think just anytime there's a community of people who are all sort of aligned in the coaching practice, but coming from different walks of life, there's a lot to be learned. So what am I going to learn today?
Yep. Yeah. Great question, Josephine. What makes questions transformative different for executives? All right. Well, if anyone else wants to answer, feel free to jump into the chat. I'm going to move us along here because this hour tends to go quickly. And along with talking about questions, I want you to have a chance to ask any questions along the way too. And that's why I love these workshops, because we can personalize it to whoever shows up and your situations too. So oftentimes we put the emphasis on questions, and I'm going to share something just a reminder that questions are the evidence of our listening. So in order to transform your questions, you have to transform the way you listen. What do you think of that concept? That's a good reminder, because oftentimes, when you experience questions, you compare yourself to other coaches and their questions, like, I want to ask questions like them. I have so many people that are tell me like, I want to steal your questions. I'm like, yeah, you can. But the reason why it's an amazing question is because it's personalized to the person because of listening. So yes, we remember all the different pieces of a powerful question, right? Short, concise, open-ended. But don't forget that it's from that space of listening. And if we think about executive clients, I'm going to take us all the way back even to design the alliance. How is your listening in that design the alliance and understanding what that person's going through, their situation, their work? I I truly believe we don't need to know a bunch of information to coach someone well and for it to be a transformative, amazing coaching session. But in order for a relationship to personalize everything to the client, we need to know a little bit more about the person. And so I will just say too, how is your listening in that design the alliance? Are you focused on getting through, making sure we're on the same page with what coaching is and what it's not, which is important too, but are you taking time to learn about them? Learn about their team, their work culture, like all those different pieces that will allow you to later personalize your coaching to them. So that's that first thought I want you to think about is in that design the alliance, how is your listening? Are you imagining what's it like to be them? Are you getting to know kind of the way that they talk about their work and their environment, all their day to day? Again, I don't think it's important for coaching to know all the details, but it's important for that relationship. And little details like even remembering their boss's name, remembering maybe a company ritual, things like that can make a huge difference for that person. Something that I did when I had a huge load of clients, or like over 100 clients a month. I tried to make sure I got just fun facts about each person so that I could personalize my approach to them. So if I know like one really loves soccer, or they are always going to a different coffee shop in the morning, or they really love take your dog to work day. I mean, just even fun little things like that could be so powerful later on. So that's my first thought. How's your listening there? Because oftentimes there's too many agendas in that first session. Cross all the dots, but then are you creating space to get to know the person and to build a connection? Because transformative questions are based on the person. Regardless if they're an executive client, a wellness client, an academic client, they're based on the person. And the more that you can personalize it to the person, even from the start, it can really transform the rest of the coaching. So that's that first thought I want to think about. How's that listening? Are you able to create some space to just listen and imagine what it's like to be them? Because again, we tend to be in this space of, I need to make sure they understand this, I understand that, and we're on the same page with this. So I personally have always practiced separating initial sessions out so it's not so many agendas in one. And so even if it's a shorter session, if it's one focus, it's going to be deeper than a long session with multiple focuses and all these different things you got to check off. So that's just that thought there. I'll pause. What questions, thoughts do you have about listening in that Design the Alliance or the initial session?
So I've had some clients who they were dying for coaching. So when we get to the part where I say, what is it that you would like to accomplish? It's like you turned on a tap. But then I have other folks who they're still sort of getting their head around what coaching is and looking for direction from me. And so it's a little bit harder to pull out of them, their deeper agenda. Do you have any tips for helping soften them up?
Yeah. And everyone's different. So it's very normal for our approach has to be a little different with each client. I will say that my approach is always, not just what the problem is, because sometimes people come to coaching just because they want to see things be better or different. And sometimes when there's a problem, they're like very aware of the problem. Then it's like they're ready to take off and I want to get to work. But sometimes they could be aware of just what would you like to see different about your life or better about your life? I love those questions, different or better. And not just different or better about your life or your work, but what do you want to be different or better about you? And spacing those questions out, because oftentimes if I ask, what are your goals for coaching? That's too broad. But what would you love to change about your work? That's going to elicit a different response. So with those initial questions, even with goal setting, they can be transformative the more specific they are. I will say too, and I've seen many coaches fall into the anything you want to talk about, anything you'd like to work on in this coaching? And it punts it back to you to figure it out. Because if I say, any questions? Do you want to have a question? It doesn't open up that pathway the same way that an open-ended question does. So pausing and catching ourselves in that thinking, because it's natural. We order coffee. Anything else? Okay, that's a normal question we encounter all the time. So being specific, and it might sometimes be, what do you like about your work? What do you wish was different? Right. So just teasing that out. Sometimes what is going on and what would you like to be different? Depending on the client, you might even go very more playful. Like, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change about your work? Or if you could wake up tomorrow and your life be ideal, what would that be? So there's definitely a lot of playful questions you could do. I would say personalize it to the person. Don't make it about being cute. I say that as when I was a new coach, I got called out by John and Andrew Williams about trying to be cute with questions. So I will tell you that. Sometimes the simplest question can be the most profound, but there is a time for playful questions that could really help someone see something that they couldn't see if it was asked differently. What do you think, Allison? Does that answer your question?
Yes, but now I have a follow-up question, which is, could you please provide an example of an excessively cute question that we should avoid?
Well, it depends, but if it's coming from this place and you're listening of, what question do I ask? What's the best question to ask? Then you're making it about you, and it's probably going to lead to a cute or clever question because you're making it about you and your performance. So again, it goes back to our listening. What is our presence in our listening? What is it like to be this person?
I see.
Or how can I be a really good coach right now?
So a cute question is like when you're trying to be profound to sort of impress your client with how, insightful of a question, versus just being super neutral and taking opportunities to maybe dig deeper or reflect back that could be simpler and less impressive.
Yes, we're putting pressure on a question, and that's a thought I want to give you all is, we need to remember our questions are not for us. And they're not about us. We put so much pressure, something that could seem really basic to me could be someone's life-changing question. And sometimes it's the simple, oh, doesn't feel powerful. Well, it's okay if it doesn't feel powerful for you. It's not for you. So yeah, any clever, creative, trying to connect the dots, bring it all together. If it's ever about us or something we want to prove, then it's a question you probably shouldn't ask. And a lot of times it's leading too. Cute questions can be very leading. Right? I will say though, sometimes there's definitely gold nuggets in clever, cute, and playful, fun questions. Sometimes it's about waiting for that question if we feel too attached or excited about it. So sometimes it's about timing with your questions. Sometimes we have to hold questions and wait. Sometimes I say we have to date a question for a little bit before we commit to it. And that's okay. I always say, if it's meant to be asked, you'll have a chance to ask it. Right? Otherwise, kind of let it go and stop putting so much pressure on your questions. So we've talked about kind of the beginning of a coaching engagement, taking time to understand someone. I will also say I'm not a big intake forms, all of that. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I just want to always be careful of making assumptions about people, and developing kind of a picture of them before I get to know them, and just let them tell me what they want me to know about them. But I will say that could be helpful in an executive space to understand the different pieces, especially if they're looking for really specific outcomes or names of different projects they're working on. So that could be a thing that you personalize to the person. what do you want me to know about you? What's the best way to partner with you? Is there a way that you'd like us to document that or to set things out? It depends on your client. It really does. But I would, again, personalize it to the person, what's most helpful for them. I will say, and I've coached a lot of executive clients. I had a huge influx of executive clients in 2020. All of them wanted to work on their well-being because there was so much stress in that time and burnout and the unknown and all of that. So that's another piece. But I will say, regardless of executive wellness or academic, you still want to find out more about the person. Yes, you want to find out about their context, their work, what they want coaching on is really important to get clear. But what is it they want to work on with themselves? Because it's really hard to have coaching be transformative if they want to stay on the surface, if they just want to be coached on their problems. Now, I will say, sometimes that's what people need to get started into coaching. It's okay if you're not able to go to the deeper level with them. If they're not ready, I mean, you can still pursue it, but you don't have to force it. It still can be transformational coaching, even if it's not masterful coaching. The goal is not always mastery. It's meeting the client where they're at. And you'll get an idea of where they're at. But in that initial session, finding out about their goals for work and life, who they want to be, that will help you be able to ask some really great questions. So often I see just having on the surface, oh, I want to be a better leader at work. Well, how are you leading in your life? Right? To see how just applying the question to other areas, that's going to affect my approach to that person. That's going to open their eyes up to, oh, this is just one area of my life. I'm still a human being. And so it's important to understand the scope of other things, because then later in the coaching, there's so many questions that come from that space, relating other things back to work into other areas of life. I'll say too, sometimes when I practice with clients, regardless of their background or their niche or executive client, I think all my clients are human beings and they have a life. And so doing a wheel of life is a really great tool in that initial session of goal setting. So to your point, Allison, earlier, that can be really helpful just to kind of get it out of your head onto the wheel and like, what does life look like? And just even getting into what was that like to fill out? What did you notice? Oftentimes we miss so many great questions because we go to problem solving, right? How can we raise those numbers rather than what do you like about your wheel? What stands out to you? Just so don't forget, those simple, basic questions can really be transformative. Okay. Other thoughts or questions before we move on?
I have one, and I think you and I talked about this before, but the two of the executive clients that I had came with a specific wish and to work on, and they were asking right off the bat, which is something that I would have asked too, is what's going to be the process? I'm sure you have some sort of a framework to work. How's it looking like? It's almost like, I know each time that I meet with you, I'm going to work on that, or, we're going to get from here to there. It's a very executive minded kind of question. What experience do you have with that?
Yeah. And I will say that it's very important to tell outcomes focused. It's very important to tell clients about, for example, the learn, be, do model. Again, very basic, but usually we're coming in, this is the problem I want it fixed. Well, in coaching, my approach is before we can fix the problem, I want to help you learn about yourself and learn about the problem. We call that the learn, be, do model. So if you can tell and design that with them, then when they come into the session, maybe they're coming like, I need to fix this, and they're very problem focused, inviting them back into learning and being. Because here's the thing, you're going to be able to ask more transformative, curious, powerful questions if the client's getting curious with you. But it's very normal that we have to design that with them and anchor them back. So that's a very basic process. I would make sure to tell every client, regardless if they're executive or not. The other thing I would tell them about is pause. Because this is one of my other key points here is oftentimes we don't process our listening. We interrupt our listening. And so we need to tell clients that pausing is part of coaching. It's their chance to think and reflect, take notes, do the inner work of coaching. So I tell that's part of the process. Otherwise you get did I lose you? Are you there? Was that too hard of a question? Those real things that happen because they don't understand the process. So tell them about pause. So learn, be, do, pause. I pause for you, but I also pause for me because I'm processing what you said. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second here. The other thing that I would always tell every client is agenda setting because we're not used to setting agendas in real life. And the deeper and the more you can set things up in the agenda, the more transformative the rest of the coaching is going to be. But if the client isn't with you in setting the agenda, it's going to pull you out of your presence because you're like, I'm trying to hit the pieces and finish setting this agenda. So if the client's with you and understands that process, that makes a huge difference. So, for example, I tell them each session, come prepared with what you want to work on, why it matters to you, what you want to receive from the session, and then just plan that we're going to dig in a little bit because the more we understand what you want to be coached on, the more we're going to make sure you're going to get out of coaching. So those three processes, learn, be, do, pause, and agendas, I feel like every client needs to know about because then we can anchor back to them. So say they come to the session, I want to work on this and solve this problem and get, there's an urgency in their voice. What are you most curious about learning today, right? Like even in the agenda setting, inviting them into that and finding more of what they want to work, what do they want to learn? Because it can't just be what I want to do. It needs to be what I want to learn, what I'm curious about. And it's very normal to have to remind them. But if you're with the client, coaching is a partnership. So the more we can get them with us and these very basic things, the more you're going to sit back and listen and trust that you don't have to worry about keeping the client with you or in this mode. Then you can just be working together, be getting curious together, leaning into pause together. Right? If you think about even your own coach training journey, it took a little while before it clicked. Right? There's this click like, oh, it makes sense now. Clients have that same experience. So just be patient with them and just, even if you design all the things, it's normal to anchor back to it, but it'll make it so much better in the long run if you continue to just remind them about what coaching is and what it means and that we're getting curious and you want to help them to get the most out of the coaching process. So those are three processes. I have additional processes like that I focus on. And as you go through coach training and working with clients, you might develop your own process as well. But those ones are ones I feel like everyone needs to design with their clients. Other thoughts? Questions? All right. So what Ronit's question led me to is this idea that we don't process our listening, we interrupt it. Right. And so if we want to transform our questions, we wouldn't need to transform the way we listen. We really got to give ourselves space to process our listening. Think of it as two separate jobs. When you're listening, you're just in, what is it like to be this person? I'm empathetic. If they're walking on the beach, I'm imagining sand between my toes. Like I am there with them. I'm not thinking, what question do I need to ask? Right. So if that's where you're finding that you get kind of pulled out of your listening, just start practicing there. Practicing. Okay. Nope. I don't. I got the question will come. I need to focus on the person, what it's like to be them. Then instead of interrupting your listening, practice giving space. So again, it needs to be designed so the client's like, "Are you there?" So that's where you can process. What did I hear? What am I curious about? What is my intuition saying? What's in between the lines? You see, there's so much more we can have access to if we take the time to stop and access it. Because often it's listen, what question do I ask? But if it's listen, what am I curious about? What am I hearing? What am I not hearing? What is my intuition saying? How does this connect to even other things I've heard from this client? So you need space to ask yourself questions before you ask the client questions. And it doesn't mean that it has to be long. I mean, just it's amazing just even the difference a couple seconds will make. But try that transition. Rather than what question do I ask? What am I most curious about? And then what question will I ask? It makes a huge difference in the questions. When you improve your listening and your processing of your listening, you'll improve your questions. What do you think of that? No problem, Samantha. Thank you. Yeah. And just know it takes practice. And so you'll know with certain clients where something's easier and where something's harder. Your listening, your questions are always personalized to the person. That gives into the empowering quality we talk about so often. So just know your processes, the way you use tools, your questions, is all personalized to the person. And so that it could be that the different challenges you encounter are personalized to the person too. If you've had it where some clients it's super easy to ask questions, and some it's harder. It's just think about rather than trying to make every client like this other client, how can you meet them where they're at? How can you personalize your approach to them? My next point is that sometimes questions need a playground. Hey, Josephine. Yep, we need to transform our listening to transform our questions. There are certain clients that need a little bit more structure in order to get curious. So again, going back to design the alliance, how do they want to interact with tools? Sometimes the whole exploration is totally different when you have a tool that they want to choose versus they're going all over the place. And it's harder to get them to focus and be curious. So inserting a tool gives you kind of this playground with them to be curious about. So it just really, again, depends on the person where you might just go with the flow and see what tools naturally come up and take pieces from tools. Totally fine. But there will be some clients where you need to give them more structure. And I will say with executives, they're looking for, at least from my experience, they tend to look for more tools and they look for guidance. They look for structure and advice too. And so that goes back to understanding what coaching is. But even ahead of time, designing some tools and giving them some things to choose from could be really powerful and really empowering because if they have the choice. So as you're hearing their goals, hey, we might include future self and values. I feel like every executive client I've ever worked with, they need to work on their values because they haven't done the values like we as coaches do it. So as you listen to someone, you might, be thinking about what tools would be useful for them to go through, and you might plan ahead of time, and then it's easier to be curious because they have a container for it rather than where do I go? So I will say that's been a best practice for me with executives is picking tools. Now, if they don't want to pick tools ahead of time or like have a menu, I'm going to listen to what's going on and then have tools to pick from. So that's where you have a little bit of food for thought here is what are the problems my clients tend to be facing? What do I see coming up for them quite often? And what tools do I know about that I could bring in? What can I empower them with? And not that you're planning the session out, but just keeping that in mind. Okay, if they say this, then I could start getting curious about this. I can go over here. But I will find that's been a common theme. What other things do you see working with executive clients that makes it challenging to ask transformative questions? Hannah, one thing that I see, and looking at adjusting this potentially, so the next round of leadership coaching that I'm doing at work is when they didn't nominate themselves to participate in this. They were selected by their leader, which again, sometimes works out really well. And then sometimes I really struggle to, like you said, get below the surface. So I'm thinking about trying to change it to more of a nomination process, but do you have any tips or thoughts on that? That is a very common problem. And so what I will say, and this goes for even academic coaching, and where the parent or like they were voluntold to be coached, is that they need to want something. If there's no gap, there can be no coaching. So if someone else sees it for them, but they don't see it like, what do I want to change or be different or better? You can't coach them. So then the first initial piece becomes, where are you and where do you want to be? What are the gaps? Because yes, someone else could sponsored you or nominated you, but you have to want something for yourself, because I help you get what you want as your coach. I partner with you towards where you want to go. If you don't want to go anywhere, I can't take you there. Right? So establishing the value of coaching is extremely important, and they have to want it. Now, I would say if initially at first they don't see, I don't know what I want to work on. Well, if they're even willing to find out what they want to work on, there's a gap. So as long as they're willing and they are willing to get curious, like, I'm not sure, I don't know how to use coaching, I was just volunteered. So they have to even want to discover that. If they don't, then it's really hard to coach them. So I'd say, even if people don't know their goals, I don't even know what this is all about. I was, my company sponsored this. I hear that all the time. Be patient with them, but as long as they're willing to discover what they want or willing to discover how coaching can benefit them, then now there's a gap. There's something you can partner towards. Sometimes the first month of coaching, I've had like executive clients where like I take time to get to know them and connect with them, understand their goals and context. But then sometimes the first month is discovering what are their goals. What do you want to be different or better about you, your life, or your work? And this is being patient. Because sometimes people aren't thinking like that. They're like, oh, look, does it sound like a great opportunity? And that's all they know. So when you can help them start to identify gaps, you can talk about how coaching can help get you there. So say, let's use the values example, because that comes up so often. How could discovering your values and what you're actually willing to experience benefit you? I might not tell them, I'd ask them. And you're going to start to think about that. So to your question, Amanda, rather than trying to tell them what coaching can benefit them, ask them questions so they realize it for themselves. But sometimes it takes time to be patient with them. But as long as they're willing and they're willing to get curious with you, then you're able to see if they're able to move forward. I will say too, having, like, I know some executive companies I partnered with, like BetterUp, for example, I don't see all the information, but it helps see where someone falls in terms of the best way to coach them. Tools like that are really helpful. And knowing, oh, this person has high awareness but low commitment, or this person's here. And then knowing how to approach them. So if you don't have something like that, just being upfront, like, hey, I know you were sponsored here, and I can't coach you unless you want to be, unless you want something from us. What's the best way for me to partner with you? What do you want me to know about you? Right? Those initial questions are so important. But just know it's not your job to prove that coaching works. To tell them how to benefit them, ask them. Because when someone starts getting curious, this is a key ingredient to questions, because you could ask the profound question and the client not get curious, but they're going to just fall flat. It wasn't even the question, it was the person. So rather than just the question, you got to think about the person. Thanks, Amanda, for that. What else do you face with working with executive clients? Sue?
So I dealt a lot with type A personalities that don't want to take time. They want they because of the stress and busyness, I guess, of what they have going on. It's helping them understand and find and become important to take time and make space so
Yeah.
they can make better decisions. Um, I asked one of my executive clients just the other day, what is it costing you to not take space? And that made a huge difference because he would get very distracted during our coaching sessions because I could tell he was thinking about other things. So anyway, I've run into that with several of them. Just you can tell they're not fully present in the coaching session.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've dealt with that in other ways you might address that issue.
Yeah. There's a couple different things I think about, but I think about the length of a session can make a huge difference. Sometimes people get more out of a 30-minute session than an hour session. So length of session, the space between sessions, right? Every week versus every other week. Sometimes new clients need every week for a short amount of time. I've seen that with executives. And then we move to every other week. So that's another thing to think about. Think about what else they have going on that day. If they have a bunch of stressful meetings and this is just something else they're fitting in, this is going to change it versus what's the best, placement in your day. If they're trying to do other work, they're not going to be fully present with the coaching, which will again also affect your presence because you're trying to get them to be present. So thinking strategically and planning together, again, they have to want to. Do they want to get something out of coaching? They want to fit what they want out of coaching. You can't make them want that. But you can ask them questions about how to design the coaching experience so it best fits everything they had going on. Like, for example, I moved to a lot of 20-minute sessions with people, and they got so much out of it. And we were strategic about where we chose that, what else was going on in their day, what was going on at home. Also, going from changing mediums of the coaching session can help, right? So, for example, walk and talk sessions are amazing with the executives, or going camera off. It's also really helpful for you listening because then you're like, I'm listening even deeper to things I hear in their voice. It's a good practice, I would say, for every coach. But that can be the medium too. They've been sitting at their desk all day, just getting up and walking around, as long as they, there's not distractions or trying to do other things. That can also be another really big helper with that. Allison?
Yeah, Hannah, how did you manage the 20-minute sessions? Did you have 3 of them and price them for an hour? Were they multiple times per week? On the one hand, it sounds really great, like a nugget, but on the other, it sounds like doing 20-minute sessions could be exhausting because you would do so many of them potentially.
You're exactly right. It needs to work for you too.
Okay.
So time of day, length of session, medium of session, all of that, you have to consider for yourself what helps me be the best, most present coach. I will say, the clients that I worked with that, there was full length coaching sessions before that to really get established. With a new client who doesn't know anything about coaching, you might need, again, every week for an hour, and you're really getting settled into the process before you could introduce something like that. Just depends on their level of awareness and what their goals are and things like that. And again, my approach to 20-minute sessions is very different because I've seen Like the more practice you get in coaching, the more like you're able to see in a shorter amount of time the transformation someone can experience. Whereas like when you're still new and several of you have been in 2.0, so like, wow, the power of like just a couple questions and how that can make a difference. So depends on your journey. It really depends on the client. There's certain clients I would not do really short sessions with, depending on them. They need some time to kind of settle in. They need time to like explore even more so. So if someone's in and I would say the key indicator I use is if they have being awareness, like this is what I want to work on with me, that makes a huge impact on those 20-minute sessions. I will say personally, I always price my coaching by hours. And then if we end up pivoting how we use those hours, like they pay for 2 hours a month and they end up at 1 hour and then 2 half-hour sessions, or we just design that ahead of time.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty know each other for that format to work. Yeah, and having that, John, that level of awareness of, I already know this is what I want to work on with me today. This is what I'm diving into. I'm ready. This is what I want to go after. And you as a coach are just able to go deeper. Another thought with agendas is if you can think about agendas as coaching. Oftentimes we think of them as, we need to get agendas done before I can coach. But there's so much gold in agendas that could change the rest of the coaching session. So if, yes, practice on your listening, giving space for your listening, processing your listening. But think about now I'm thinking. Maybe we'll just leave it there. What comes up for you when I say that? When I go down that rabbit trail?
Well, what comes up for me is that executives are responsible for developing strategy, and strategy is choosing. So I could see how setting an agenda, a lot of the work is actually done in picking what the agenda is going to be and what the outcomes you want, which of course executives are also challenged for. Any investment they make, they need to be able to show what the return is. So it's practicing.
Yeah. And I've seen so many times where if we go into agenda setting with the idea of what am I curious about with, like, for example, if you've never asked the question, what makes this a problem for you in the agenda setting, try it. It is so powerful and it's so easy to assume, oh, of course I do. That's why there's stakes. You want, that's a problem. That's something you'd work on. That can transform the whole conversation. But the more you get depth in the agenda, the more you can get it throughout the rest of the session. So think about coaching as you're setting the agenda. Now, yes, we want to manage time. We don't want it to take off. So I usually say you want to deepen the agenda. You don't want to broaden it. So you don't want to ask questions about, broadening and expanding the topic rather than like deepen it. So being questions are your secret weapon in agenda setting to go deeper. But like, what makes it a problem for you? I've had so many great, like amazing sessions where realizing what the real problem was super transformative to the person that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But as you think about even agenda setting, how can you get the client curious with you? You could even design that. Here's an agenda. That's already coaching. I mean, the check-in's coaching too. I mean, from the very first breath, right there. Hi, how are you? Right? You're already coaching. And I encourage you to adopt that perspective because if you can pursue some depth, the client can get curious with you about their agenda. You're able to get a little bit more depth there. And again, like think about pursuing depth. If the client's not ready, that's okay too. But just even pursuing it. How is this? What do you want to work on with you as it relates to this problem at work? Even that can start them thinking like, what is it that I'm going to work on with me? The other question I would invite you to try around agenda setting that could be super amazing, and you've probably heard me say this one before, but asking them where they want to start after the agenda is set. Or where do you want to go from here? I have literally had clients cry, but then they're starting to inner resource. They're leading you. It takes pressure off your questions, right? Because so often we don't have those transformative, amazing questions because we're putting pressure on them. So whether it's after the agenda is set, or maybe the client's having a lot of exploration, you're unsure of what to ask. If you have pressure to ask a question, I want to encourage you not to ask a question, but rather space. And then you can empower and lean on the client. So for example, right after the agenda, instead of, where do I take this? What's the best question to ask? How do I help them? Right? Because that's very common. We can be honest, we probably have all done that. Where do you want to start? What do you want to explore first? Super empowering. Then the client's leading the exploration, and then you can just be curious and imagine what it's like to be them, and you find out what's most important to that person. Sometimes they take it in a direction you weren't expecting, but it's where they want to go, right? That can be super transformative. Throughout the session, if you ever find pressure, what do I ask? You've gotten into level 1. So how can you create space to get back in level 2? And have some questions in your back pocket. I mean, I'd be very careful with having like just habitual questions or go-tos, but in certain situations, it's okay to have go-to questions or questions you pull out. So for example, the question, what do you need to ask yourself right now? That doesn't just work with fellow coaches. Like, that is a super powerful transformation question. Or what stands out to you about what you're saying? Rather than what do I need to ask about from what they just said? And you're getting super in level 1 and pressure, right? So how can you take that pressure off those questions and lean on the client? What are you most curious about here? What stands out to you about what you're saying? What are you learning? They're simple, but have those in your back pocket. I often refer to those as learning in the moment or awareness in the moment questions. But oftentimes those questions give us the nugget of the thing to ask about. So if you want to ask better questions, yes, be a better listener, but empower the client to do more work. And then it frees you up to just stay curious. What do you think of that concept? How does that resonate?
It's brilliant. Definitely takes off the pressure, especially at the moment, like when you're in the moment, feeling that pressure. It like brings me back engaged in being curious about, because it gives me a pause while they're thinking.
Yep. You're able to stay curious. So anytime you don't have a question, you feel pressure, ask yourself, how can I lean on the client rather than on myself? Because then it's making it about you, your performance, how do I be a good coach right now? And it'll only make the coaching better. There's really no risk to it. It's always a good time to say, what are you curious about, right? Lean on the client, empower them. There might be a little bit of design around this though too. So I believe you're the expert. So what that means, there might be moments in the coaching session where I invite you to make a question for yourself. I'm going to empower you as the expert. Oftentimes we wait to trust clients and empower them as the expert until we see evidence. But how they become empowered is I'm putting my trust there. I'm putting you in that position before I believe that you have what you need, right? Sometimes it's so much easier with clients who are super self-aware. But we need to treat every client like they're super self-aware so that they develop that self-awareness, so that they learn to trust themselves, right? So we got to empower them, and then even that confidence in themselves comes. But it's okay to tell them that's going to happen, because what do you mean? What am I curious about? I've had that happen, right? So that's kind of all throughout the coaching session. So we talked about the agenda out around the coaching, like the middle section, leaning on the client, empowering the client. The other piece I want you to think about, and as we wrap up, is the end of a session. Oftentimes at the end of a session, we get into action mode. Let's wrap it up. I need to land the plane. It's not your plane. You are not the pilot. Okay. So just like agenda setting, where we could be like, I need to check the boxes. Action. We need to let go of trying to land the plane and stay curious in the action, because there's so many great questions to ask in action that we don't create space for because we're trying to land the plane. How do you get a thinker to share more feelings? Oh, that's a great question, Tracy. I would say in general, just telling them about learn, be, do, and the importance of not just exploring a problem, thinking through it. We can definitely go detailed and get curious about all the pieces, but you are key to your problem. So we need to explore you. So feelings, thoughts, beliefs, perspectives, emotion, values, all of that is important. And I just want you to know, like, I'll give you space around those questions. It's okay if you don't know. Yeah, do they want to share more feelings? I will say in general with executives, I've found, again, tools be really helpful. So something called the feelings wheel or the emotions wheel, really, really helpful. Rather than making them name it on the spot, giving them practice around that, I've personally found really helpful with executives. But what are they? Yeah, to John's point too, like what they might be ready to talk about perspectives or assumptions, beliefs. But in general, just telling them it's part of being and they are key to their problem. Yeah. How do you get a doer? Yeah, you want them to lean into being and learning. And so I'm saying that, hey, that's awesome. You want to get stuff done and accomplish. But the more we learn about you and your topic, your problem, the more you're going to know what to do. And the more it's going to be even well designed. The other thing I would say too with the doers is getting curious about beliefs, because oftentimes our self-worth is wrapped up in what we do and what we've been able to accomplish. We don't. There's a lot of different versions, Carla. I would say, I know, for example, with executive plans, there's some, like BetterUp has a lot of executive coaching resources that are even available to the public. So there's one, I can see if I can find it. I can send it to you, Carla, that I like to use. But there's a lot out there. All right. Well, I'm going to practice what I preach. I'm not going to try and land the plane with you all, but just want to wrap up with this thought around action. There's so much more to explore in action. We need to stay in the same mode in action that we stay in when we're in learning and being. And creating space for that is really important. And oftentimes the biggest barrier to asking great questions in action is lack of time. So allowing some time, and how are we doing so far? Right? There's an awareness in the moment question. We have about 10 minutes left. How do you want to spend it? Empowering the client to lead. But it's okay to anchor back to that time. If in the event you are 2 minutes left. Well, we're literally at 2 minutes left. That's funny. We're 2 minutes left, rather than suggesting a cute, clever action or trying to wrap it up for them. Here's a transformative question you can ask. How would you want to wrap up today? How do you want to complete our time? What do you want to say to feel complete? See a pattern here? Your client is key to your questions. I will open up if there's other questions or thoughts, and then let's go to the chat and share just what you're taking away. It's not about me. Or expansive agenda setting. And anyone else who wants this, here is a very basic feelings wheel that I've used with clients. That is not my Venmo at the bottom. You don't have Venmo, but this is one you could just pull it and create a PDF from. It's pretty straightforward. And just be patient with those folks that aren't, sometimes they need time to open up. That's okay. There's still plenty of being you can start, get them to think about. And I will say one quick other tip with feeling questions, and feelings, don't ask, how does it feel? That'll end up, it feels too broad for some people and ends up a lot of times actually with story rather than what they actually feel. So naming emotion, naming perspective, even naming a thought is going to be more specific, and it's going to give you something to dive deeper into and then to ask even a more powerful question about. So just a thought there. I'm not saying don't ever ask feeling questions, but just be mindful of what happens with certain clients around those types of questions, because sometimes it doesn't deepen the coaching. It just broadens it, expands it, makes it less specific. Wonderful. All right. Well, I'll let you all go. Thank you so much for being here, and encourage you, whatever stood out to you today, practice, whether it's more practice your listening, practice leaning on the client, giving yourself space to process your listening, whatever it might be. I encourage you to carry that forward. And I'll look forward to seeing you all around the community.